Okay, a few weeks ago we looked at what is called in Galatians the weak and beggarly elements. We talked about how that Paul uses the phrase, pretty much why do you desire to return or go back to those things? And we laid the foundation that the things of God, the feast days of God, are not what Paul was referring to, because we asked the question then, how can you go back to some place that you've never been? And I had several comment on this statement that I made online. You can't say that you're going back to Disney World if you've never been to Disney World. You can't go back there. You got to go there your first time. So these Galatians were Gentiles. They were former pagans. So the weak and beggarly elements he's talking about is pretty much those things that they kept, those things that they felt brought them into salvation. And so we talked about tonight some of the things that Paul understood, and how that we here at the Potter's House agree that the Sabbath is important. It's still for us today, and that keeping the law of God is still for us today. But we talked about how that the church would part ways with us when it comes to the Sabbath. But now that's not the only area that the church parts ways with. So I have this question. If you keep the Sabbath and if you do the feast of God, then the church says, or church, let me say this way, churchianity says that you are trying to be Jewish, correct? We've all heard that. We're all familiar with that. Now most of them, if you keep the Sabbath, they're not going to give you a hard time. There are some out there in churchianity that have no problem if you keep the Sabbath, as long as you don't tell them that they need to be keeping the Sabbath too. You go ahead and keep the Sabbath, you do the Sabbath, you have your service, and we're good. But don't come and tell me that I need to keep the Sabbath. But now, if you begin to do Passover and Tabernacles and Pentecost, then a lot of them will have issues with that, and they will say that that's when you're trying to be Jewish. That was a Jewish thing. But now my question is this, and y'all can ask this same question, those who would come against y'all. But if keeping these things that are rooted and grounded in the Bible, and they are things that God said, this is what I want you to do. If doing those things make you Jewish, then what does keeping man-made, pagan-rooted holidays make that individual? Pagans, yeah. And that is the absolute 100% truth. If you're going to turn and use their mentality on them, what's that one saying? What's good for the goose is good for the gander. So you can turn it around and say, okay, Christmas, you can search it online. Christmas is from a pagan-rooted holiday. Your fall festival is from a pagan-rooted holiday. Your celebration of Easter is from a pagan-rooted holiday. So if you choose to keep these days instead of the days that are rooted and grounded in God, if that makes me a Jew, and I wouldn't tell them this makes you a pagan, I would just ask them, what does this make you? Because they're not Christian. You can't find Christianity for centuries keeping these holidays, but you can find where Christianity stole them and pulled them into Christianity so that the pagans could still have their celebrations and still call themselves Christian. That's what that's for. So this is a question that we have to ask, because I think for too long, people, and I hate to use the word Hebrew roots, because the Hebrew roots is such a messed up organization, messed up group. So it's the apostolic roots, covenant keepers. We have for too long kind of hunkered, I guess, behind the car door, behind the bush, hid behind the tree, when we are confronted with these things. But I think it's time to, from time to time, it's not hurtful to use their own mentality with them. when they come against you. And this is a good way. You have to just ask the question back to them, not hatefully, not like something. Well, what's that make you? You know, not like that, but in a loving manner, in a non-abusive tone. Say,
turn or burn.
yes.